These three true rest-stop horror stories prove that the most ordinary places hide the most extraordinary evil. What you are about to hear is based on real events, told by the truckers and a family who survived them. First, a driver picks up a mysterious young woman who looks identical to his daughter, only to make a frantic phone call and discover his own child has just vanished. Next, a family pulls over for a quick break, but their stop is shattered by terrifying screams coming from inside a locked bathroom stall that is supposed to be empty. Finally, a long-haul trucker, seeking a safe place to rest, witnesses a figure with glowing red eyes dragging a body into the woods just feet from his cab. The highway doesn't just lead to your destination. It leads to places where things wait for you to stop. Subscribe and turn on notifications. You're going to want to see what happens next. A steady rumble from the Cummins X15 engine was all the company Gary had. It was just after 2:30 in the morning on a lonely stretch of I-70, somewhere west of Oakley, Kansas, and the world had shrunk down to a pair of headlights cutting through the dark. At 47, Gary knew this life well. His powerful, late-model rig was more home than any house had been since the divorce. The cab was clean, organized, a fortress of logic against a lonely world. Every mile marker that passed was another tick toward the money he was saving up for his daughter Mia's college graduation trip. He was fighting that deep-seated exhaustion, the kind that makes your eyes feel like they're full of sand, just trying to push on to the next truck stop. That's when he saw it. A poorly lit place called the Gosel Rest Area, its lights flickering weakly against the immense Kansas dark. A single figure stood near the edge of the pavement. Gary's first instinct was to keep going. You don't stop. You never stop. But as his headlights swept across the person, his foot came off the accelerator. It was a young woman in a thin dress, the kind of clothes you might have seen 40 years ago. She was drenched, though it wasn't raining. But what made his heart seize in his chest was her face. It was Mia's face, the same wide, anxious eyes, the same nervous way she tucked a strand of wet hair behind her ear. Every rule he had ever lived by on the road evaporated, replaced by a raw, fatherly instinct to protect. He hit the air brakes, and the loud, sharp hiss tore through the quiet of the night. He leaned across the cab and pushed open the passenger door. The dome light flickered on, casting a pale glow on her as she climbed inside. She moved with a strange quickness, and the door clicked shut behind her. A sudden, clammy cold filled the cab, the kind that has nothing to do with the weather. "Kansas City," she said, her voice quiet, almost a whisper. She stared straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. Gary noticed there was no puddle forming on the floor mat, no sound of water dripping from her clothes, just an unsettling stillness. He engaged the clutch, the big rig lurching forward back onto the highway. He reached over and worked the slightly sticky lock on her door until he heard the solid clunk of it engaging. It was a habit. Secure the cab. He drove for maybe a minute, the silence in the cab growing heavier and heavier. He glanced at his mirrors, then over at the passenger seat to say something, to ask her what happened. The seat was empty. A cold sweat broke out across his forehead and the base of his neck. His heart didn't just drop. It felt like it had fallen through the floor of the truck. He stomped on the brakes again, pulling the rig onto the shoulder with a jarring lurch. His breath came in short, ragged gasps. He searched the whole cab, the sleeper, under the seats. Nothing. He told himself it was the exhaustion, the witching hour. He was just seeing things. He had to be. To prove his own sanity, he powered up the small screen for his dashcam. He fast-forwarded the footage. It showed him pulling over, the door opening, and then a blast of static and a loud crackle. When the picture returned, he was driving away, the passenger seat beside him completely empty. He turned to look at the empty seat one more time, and that's when he saw it. Lying on the smooth leather was a small, square object. A photograph, its edges curled with age. With a trembling hand, he picked it up. The cardstock was thick and felt strangely damp. It was a sepia-toned picture of the girl, a perfect double for Mia. He turned it over. Scrawled in faint ink was a date, July 12th, 1978. This wasn't exhaustion. This was real. He needed someone else to see it, someone from the real world. He dialed 911. He waited on the side of the interstate, the flashing lights of his rig the only thing moving for miles. 20 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled up behind him, bathing his cab in pulsing red and blue light. A local officer from Oakley stepped out, his boots making a crunching sound on the gravel shoulder. The cop listened patiently, his expression professional, but tinged with the deep skepticism of a man who's heard every kind of tall tale a lonely highway can produce. Gary explained everything, his voice direct and steady, trying not to sound like a lunatic. The officer did his due diligence. He swept his flashlight beam across the empty rest stop, finding no footprints, no sign of anyone. He checked the cab, noting no signs of forced entry. Then Gary showed him the evidence. First, the dashcam. The officer watched the footage, his brow furrowing at the inexplicable glitch. He replayed it twice. "Looks like a technical issue," he said, but his tone lacked conviction. Then, Gary handed him the photograph. The officer put on a pair of gloves and took the picture carefully. He looked at the image of the girl, then flipped it over to read the date. He stood there for a long moment, the only sounds being the crackle of his radio and the idle of Gary's engine. He couldn't explain it. He placed the photo in an evidence bag, the plastic making a crisp sealing sound. "Look," the officer said, handing Gary a card. "I'll file a report. Unexplained circumstances. There's no crime here that I can see, no victim. Officially, there's nothing more I can do." He looked at Gary, his professional mask slipping for just a second. "Get some sleep when you can." The officer left, and Gary was alone again, the red and blue lights vanishing down the road. The logical world had shown up, looked the impossible straight in the eye, and simply filed it away in a cabinet. He was left more alone than before, with a chilling, officially documented mystery. The fear was no longer about a ghost. This was personal. This was a message, and it was about Mia. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers so numb he could barely unlock the screen. He dialed his ex-wife, Lisa. The phone rang once, twice. On the third ring, she answered, her voice tight with worry. "Lisa," Gary said, his own voice a dry croak. "Hey, is Mia home?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, a pocket of silence so deep and terrifying it felt like the whole world had stopped. "Gary," she said, and her voice cracked. "I was just about to call you. She went to a party last night. She never came home. I've been calling her phone all night and she won't answer." The deep, steady rumble of the engine was the only sound left. Gary stared out into the endless dark of the interstate, the official police report card sitting on his dashboard next to the empty evidence bag receipt. The impossible ghost with his daughter's face had been a warning. Or maybe it was something far worse. Was his daughter missing because of this spirit from the past? Or had he just witnessed his own daughter's ghost, her fate playing out on a lonely stretch of highway, decades before it even happened? He was alone in his truck, 1,000 miles from home, with two horrifying truths and a question that had no answer. Air in West Texas is a different kind of hot. It's a physical weight, the kind that presses down on the cab of a Kenworth and cooks the air until the asphalt on Interstate 10 looks like a black, wavy river. Carter Jones had his hands wrapped around the steering wheel, a familiar position after 20 years of driving. He was a man who owned his own small rig company, a man who believed in diesel, steel, and what he could fix with his own two hands. This run was different, though. He had his wife, Ava, in the passenger seat, and their 7-year-old Madison in the sleeper behind them, making a long-haul job feel a little more like a family trip. Madison let out a sigh that was way too big for her small body. "Daddy, I'm so hot," she said, her voice a familiar whine. "Can we stop?" "Just for a little bit, please." Carter met Ava's eyes in the mirror. He knew this stretch of road like the back of his hand. There was an old rest stop coming up, a forgotten pull-off at mile marker 586. It wasn't much, just a slab of concrete with 2 cinder block buildings for restrooms, but it would have to do. He guided the massive truck off the highway, the Jake brake roaring as it slowed the heavy load. The tires made a loud crunching sound as they hit the gravel lot. An unnatural quiet hung over the place. It was completely empty, except for an old, rusted-out pickup truck parked way off in the corner, its windows so caked with dust you couldn't see inside. A steady wind pushed sand across the pavement, a dry, whispering sound like old paper being dragged across the ground. "All right, but be quick," Carter said, turning in his seat. Ava was already unbuckling Madison. The two of them stepped out of the air-conditioned cab and into the wall of heat, walking toward the women's restroom. Carter watched them go, feeling the sun beat down on his face as a single drop of sweat rolled down from his hairline. Inside the restroom, the air was shockingly cool, a damp cold that felt wrong in the middle of the desert. Ava noticed a faint, sharp smell of bleach, an odd thing for a place that looked like it hadn't been cared for in years. Madison picked the third stall. Just as the thin metal door clicked shut, a new sound started. It came from the stall right next to her, the bigger one for disabled access. It was a soft, muffled crying, a thin little whimper that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside a person's chest. Ava took a step closer, her boots quiet on the concrete floor. "Are you okay in there?" she called out, her voice gentle. The whimpering stopped. A dead, heavy silence filled the small room. Then a different sound ripped through the quiet. It was a high, piercing scream, a raw shriek of absolute terror. It wasn't a sound of pain. It was the panicked, wordless sound of an animal caught in a trap, a desperate cry that rose and fell with a terrible, frantic energy. Ava's heart jumped into her throat. She slammed her fist against the stall door, the metal rattling in its frame. "Ma'am? Are you okay? I'm going to call for help." The screaming cut off instantly. It didn't fade out. It just stopped, as if a switch had been flipped. The silence that rushed in to fill the space was so total, it made Ava feel sick to her stomach. The only sound left was the frantic, heavy pounding of her own heart. A deep chill, the kind that feels like a cold hand on the back of your neck, crawled up her spine and made the hair on her arms stand on end. She grabbed Madison, whose eyes were wide with fear, and pulled her out of the restroom, breathing in short, sharp gasps. Back in the truck, Carter listened to their story, his practical mind trying to find a logical reason. It was probably just someone having a bad day, he thought, or a stupid prank. Still, he saw the genuine fear in Ava's eyes. He got out and walked over to the restroom. He tried the door to the disabled stall, locked from the inside. Just as he was about to head back to his rig, a white Department of Transportation pickup truck pulled into the lot. A maintenance worker got out. Carter walked over to him. "You got a key for this thing?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The worker, a man named Javier whose face was weathered from years under the Texas sun, gave a simple shrug and pulled a ring of keys from his belt. He walked to the stall, put the key in the lock, and turned it. With a slow, heavy pull, he opened the door. The stall was completely empty. It was so clean, so normal, that Carter almost let out a laugh of relief. But then a wave of cold air washed over them, a freezing blast that didn't belong in the 100-degree heat. Carter's stomach tightened into a cold knot. He pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight, pointing the bright beam into the stall. And that's when he saw it. Carved deep into the metal on the inside of the door were hundreds of sharp, vertical gouges. They were claw marks, frantic and desperate, like a wild animal had tried to scratch its way out. Higher up on the door, scratched in what looked like a desperate, shaking hand, were two words, "Help me." And just below that, in the messy, panicked writing of a child, was another message, "Mommy, please help me." There were no names, no dates, just the terrible, silent proof of something awful, frozen in time. They got back in the truck and drove away in a thick, stunned silence. Carter finally broke it by picking up his phone and dialing 911, his voice flat and professional as he reported what they had found. The call became an official report. Later, when giving his statement, Javier, the maintenance worker, added one last chilling detail. He said things like this weren't that uncommon out here. He'd seen other things, in other rest stops on this long, lonely highway. Other scratches, other weird signs that the road had a dark side that nobody could explain. The family never really spoke about that day again, but Carter still runs that same route, hauling goods from El Paso down that long stretch of I-10. Every single time he sees the green sign for mile marker 586 coming up in the distance, he feels it. His hands get a little tighter on the wheel, his knuckles go white, and he keeps his eyes locked straight ahead on the road. He just pushes the engine a little harder until that place is far behind him. You see a lot of strange things out there on the road, things you just can't explain. But some things you don't just see. They get in the truck with you, and they never, ever leave. For 15 years, Bud's life was the road. As a long-haul trucker, his world was mostly just the blacktop in front of him and the sound of his engine for company. He wasn't a complicated guy. He liked the routine of it all, the greasy spoon diners, the cheap coffee, and the simple job of getting something from one place to another. He knew the road had its dangers, a blown tire, a sudden snowstorm, other drivers not paying attention. But the thing that really got under his skin wasn't any of that. It was the quiet, the deep, dark quiet on those long stretches of highway between towns, when he was the only soul for miles. That kind of alone can play tricks on you. This particular night he was bone-tired. He'd been pushing himself for too many hours, trying to get through the winding, dark highways of northern New Jersey before calling it a night. His eyes felt like they had sand in them. He knew he was a danger, so when a sign for a rest stop appeared in his headlights, he felt a wave of relief. For anyone who doesn't know, a rest stop is just a big parking lot off the highway where travelers can pull over. They have gas, a little restaurant, and a place to stretch your legs. In the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, it's a welcome sight. The lot was lit up, with a few other rigs parked for the night, and some RVs with their curtains drawn. It felt safe. He went inside the diner and ordered a sandwich and a black coffee. The place was warm and smelled like fried food and coffee, a smell he knew well. He sat there, listening to the low chatter of the other people and the clink of forks on plates. He watched a family at a booth nearby. their little kid laughing about something. It was normal, so perfectly, boringly normal. The tightness in his shoulders finally started to let go. After eating, he stepped back out into the night. The rain had stopped, but the air was cool and heavy, and you could smell the wet pavement and diesel fuel. He crunched across the wet lot back to his rig and climbed into the driver's seat. The familiar seat, the dim light on the dashboard. It was his little home on wheels. He took a long drink of water and let out a deep breath, glad he'd made the choice to stop. He was just about to put the key in the ignition when he glanced over at the edge of the property. There was a line of dark trees separating the bright parking lot from a small dark road that ran behind the rest stop. That's when he saw him, a figure standing right at the tree line where the shadows were the deepest. It was hunched over something on the ground, something big and heavy, wrapped in a black plastic bag. The figure was struggling with it, but the movement wasn't frantic or rushed. It was slow and methodical, like someone doing a job they'd done 100 times before. Bud's first thought was that it was just some guy dumping trash where he shouldn't. He tried to tell himself that, but a cold feeling was already creeping into his gut. The figure stopped what it was doing. It stood up straight and turned its head, looking directly across the lot. Directly at him. And in that exact second, the world went silent. The sound of the rain dripping from his mirror, the distant engines on the highway, the buzz of the security lights, it all just vanished. There was only a dead, heavy silence. The security lights were bright, but the figure's eyes didn't reflect them. They glowed. It was a flat, cold, deep red. Not like an animal's eyes caught in the headlights, but a steady, burning red that seemed to come from inside. Bud froze, his hand hovering over the keys. He felt pinned in his seat, and as he shifted just an inch, he saw the red eyes follow the tiny movement. They were locked right on him. Then the figure tilted its head. It was a slow, deliberate motion, a way a human head isn't supposed to move. As it tilted, he heard a sharp sound cut through the silence, like a dry twig snapping. That was it. That was the moment the cold feeling in his gut turned into pure animal terror. He wasn't just watching some guy dump trash. He was watching something else. Something wrong. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He just watched as the figure calmly dragged the heavy black bag into the darkness of the woods and disappeared. The second it was gone, the sounds of the night rushed back in. The rain, the highway, everything. He didn't wait. His hands were shaking, but he jammed the key into the ignition and the engine roared to life, shattering the night. He didn't check his mirrors. He just got that truck in gear and pulled out of that rest stop as fast as he could. He never stopped driving that night. A few days later, he saw a news report on a small TV at a truck stop diner. Police had found a body on a quiet service road in West Milford, New Jersey, just behind the rest stop where he had been. The stretch of road was infamous, a place called Clinton Road. The report said it was a runaway, and that it might be connected to a string of other killings in the area. Bud just stared at the screen, the fork frozen halfway to his mouth. The horror wasn't some ghost story. It was real, and he knew with a certainty that would haunt him for the rest of his days that he had looked right into the eyes of the person who did it. A place of safety had become a memory of pure evil, hiding right there, just beyond the light.